Hi, everyone. It's Dr. 𝗧cie. I'm an assistant prof at U of T Med, where I teach financial literacy, and I'm also on Instagram at Breaking Bad Debt. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Mark Soth, with whom I've had the pleasure of giving resident financial lectures with for the past 2 years. In our time teaching together, I learned a lot from his experience when it comes to negotiation, personal finance, and Star Trek. So Dr. Soth studied respirology and critical care, and he became the department chief of the ICU at St. Joseph's Healthcare in Hamilton. But most people know him as a physician blogger who runs the Loonie Doctor Blog. It's a popular financial blog for physicians and other high-income earners. So thank you for joining me in this interview, Dr. Soth. And I just wanted to say, I wanted to feature you because I've always admired your work-life balance, since a lot of physicians I work with tend to work until they're 70 or older. And recently, you've kind of semi-retired to focus on your blog. Did you expect to retire at your current age? And feel free to say what age range you are, and what do you spend your time doing now?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, I'm not. It's one of those funny things. I don't know that I'd really say I'm very retired, and I'm pretty sure my family would say that I'm definitely not, because I just spend a lot of time doing other things instead. So, and as far as work-life balance goes, it's been a work in progress, and part of why I write about it and I talk about it a lot is because I've been on both sides of that equation too. So I've had pretty unbalanced work-life balance for good chunks of my career as well. And when when that was happening, I think if I'd hit financial independence at that point, I probably would have been looking for the exit just because my life was pretty unbalanced. But now that I've scaled back to be working part-time, I can actually see myself continuing to do medicine for a very long time, as long as I find it interesting and that I feel like I'm doing something useful. So it's one of those things. I think it's hard to see depending where you're at. My original plan was to retire in my mid 50s, and that's still my somewhat plan. But I think at this point, I have enough respect to know that I'm not going to really know what I'm going to feel like when I'm in mid 50s until I'm in my mid 50s, because the world changes and what you're interested in changes. So what I think I might want to do in 5, 10 years from now, I might think something completely different at that time. So we'll see. I'm holding on to it kind of loosely.
And so right now, you're in your 40s, right?
Yeah.
And are you like, what percent would you say you do non-clinical versus clinical work?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably, well, it was about, I'd say, I was working for most of my career. I worked full-time intensive care, which is probably in the range of uh, 24 weeks of service per year. And then I also worked as a chief for our department. On top of that, at one point I had a respirology practice as well. So it's one of those, IC is one of those fields where if people often, I think the rule is you end up working more than one full-time job. Uh, so I did that for many years. Now I'm down to about half-time clinical, and then the half-time non-clinical work.
Okay, so kind of 50-50. And in the
Yeah.
halftime of non-clinical work, you're doing your blog. You told me you were hiking one weekend, and you're spending a lot more time with your family, I presume?
So I am spending a lot more time uh, doing different things now than I was. So my non-clinical time before was basically spent doing educational development, and then also my leadership role. And I've helped organize ventilator teaching conferences and critical care review course and that type of thing. And that all kind of wound down from my perspective, and I was able to pass that along. And then my chief job was supposed to wind down around the spring of 2020, but I've kind of stuck in that a bit longer due to the pandemic. But that's kind of winding down. So I'm filling that non clinical educational piece with my blogging and educational mission, which I've now shifted from being about critical care more to being about uh, personal finance and all of those other outside of clinical medicine skills and knowledge that we need to know as doctors, but uh, we don't get as much of it. So
Yeah.
that's that piece. And then I've also prioritized getting back into better physical condition again. because I'm getting to get to the age where it's kind of now, or I can't neglect that any longer, and spending more time at home with my wife and kids too. They're now teenagers, so my wife's quite happy that I'm spending more time at home and less time working, and my teenagers, it's kind of variable.
Yeah, and I was talking to one of my nurses the other day, and her partner is a physician, and she was telling me like, he's about the time of retirement, but he doesn't want to retire because he doesn't know what else to do when he retires. So that's why I wanted to ask you that question, because it sounds like you have a lot of these outside interests that can really fill up your time. So I just wanted to rewind a bit and talk back to your career. You said you worked in the ICU, did intensive care. Can you kind of talk about what made you choose this career and what the days are like doing ICU?
Sure. I mean, I start when I went into medicine, all I knew was my family doctor. I grew up in Northern Ontario, and our family doctors up there did everything from emerge to obstetrics to the inpatient work, the whole 9 yards. So I went into medicine thinking that's what I wanted to do, and I did actually really enjoy that that type of practice. I think if I were to have done family medicine, that's what I would have wanted to do. I did find that I liked working more with the adult patients than the small children patients, and I felt I liked looking after people who were sicker. So that started me more towards emergency medicine or internal medicine, and then again, I ended up doing critical care and respirology, which kind of is to the extreme of that spectrum. So uh, I just found that part of medicine was where I enjoyed it the most, and every part of medicine is going to have its challenging patient population or disease or condition, and the things that are challenging for people that do ICU, I don't mind, like dealing with families in difficult situations and dealing with acute crisis. I don't mind at all. In fact, I kind of like it. So uh, that that kind of drew me towards that, which is kind of the beauty of medicine, is that there's so many different flavors and people can kind of select off into their own area.
And I believe, like you said earlier, that you kind of do very intensive, like 12 weeks on. So what are kind of your hours like? Because obviously, as a family physician, I have pretty set hours every day, right? But for yourself, it's not always that way.
Yeah, and that's part of why I liked that's why part of why I like ICU. I did have a clinic for a while there, and for me, going to a regular hour clinic Monday to Friday would drive me bonkers. And seeing people with appointments all the time, I like to have the variability of the ICU, and the way the hours that I've practiced and the way that it's worked has really changed a lot over the course of my career. When I started out, you did 7 days, 24/7, and you would have been there 12 to 15 hours a day, and probably actually overnight on top of that a few nights out of the week too. So it was probably 120 hours a week, sometimes 36 hours in a row consistently, and then you were still on call but hopefully didn't get called. It was really not the best way to practice, and part of why I took on the position as chief, and we did a bunch of work prior to that, which led to us becoming a department. But we've really reorganized how we practice as a group and coordinated ourselves much better now. So now you do your 7 days of service during the daytime, and you'll be on call every second night as first call, and every second night a second call, yeah, so that which usually you won't get called. So it's a bit it's much more rare to be on for multiple days in a row with no sleep. You get a bit more cross coverage, and it ends up being somewhere between probably averages around 80 hours a week.
Wow.
Used to be kind of 100 to 120. Now it's probably 80 to 100, and if it's a really quiet week, it might be 60. But really, it's highly variable depending on what's happening with all the patients. So
Mm.
that's part of it. But when you're on for that week, you really can't be committing to doing much of anything else, because it could be one of those weeks where you're literally going all the time.
Yeah, and I know we were talking about weddings earlier and how, you got married kind of close to the end of medical school. How did you kind of balance things with your wife? And I wasn't sure, like, did you have kids around that time during your residency as well? Like, how did you kind of balance those 80-hour weeks with what your wife was doing if she was working as well?
Yeah, so we were both working. She's non-medical. She thinks hospitals are gross.
Oh, may
But
I ask what does she do?
she's a career counselor by training, and she was working as a career counselor at that time. Now she works with me running our departments. She's been doing that for the last number of years, which has honestly made both of our lives a lot better. Just we're better able to coordinate that way.
Definitely.
But yeah, it was very busy, and that's the thing. Like I was busy with medicine, and she had her career as well. And we got married right at that little break between medical school and residency, and we were both busy doing those things. And then when we were off, we spent time together, and we're quite happy with that. And then kids came along towards the end of my fellowship years, is when we had our first child, and we had our second child while I was in early practice. And the first one, it was a bit easier because I was a resident, so I was able to take a brief parental leave and spend time at home and help out. And there was two of us and one baby, so
Mhm.
so we outnumbered them,
Nice.
which
Yeah.
made it a bit better. And then when the second one came along, the first one didn't go away. So now that there's two children and two adults, it was pretty challenging, and we were both busy. We would try to do our working and then managing things at home as well. So we were both working all out. I may have been doing 100 hours of ICU a week, but my wife was doing 100 hours a week between parenting and managing things at home. And of course, when I get home, she would need a break too. So so I'd
No,
go from
it's
working in
so
the
important.
hospital to
Yeah.
work to providing some relief at home. So I think those were honestly really challenging years for us. We were exhausted all the time.
Yeah.
And everyone talks about how wonderful it is to have small children. It is wonderful and is great, but boy, that was really a tiring period in our lives.
Yeah, and it sounds like you guys managed to work as a team, right? And I really appreciate how you said you gave your wife a break because she also has her own career. And so I think having that mindset is also really important to respect each other's careers equally as well.
Yeah, I
So
mean, it did get challenging after a while, just because the issue with us is, for my job, I would be working weird on irregular hours, and so it's kind of unreliable. Where as she was able to have daycare because she worked business hours, but the problem started to arise when they would be sending the kid home from daycare every like all the time because they had a sniffle or whatever, and then she'd have to take time off of work because of that. So I think it really did I think it impinged on her career more, much more than it did on mine. She really kind of took the hit on that one, unfortunately.
mhm,
But
mhm.
I think every couple has to find their own way of balancing and working their way through it. It made more sense for us to do it that way, but I think other people may decide to hire a nanny or have uh, maybe they have family around that can help out. There's lots of different ways
Yeah.
that
Did
people
you guys
handle
have
it.
a nanny for both of you as well,
No,
or?
no, we didn't
Mhm.
have a nanny, and we didn't really have any family around us either.
Right.
So it was basically the two of us on our own to make that work.
So it sounds like you have a very busy life, and then throughout it all, you managed to start the Loonie Doctor blog. So can you tell me a bit about why you decided to start this blog?
Sure. I mean, I think one thing to know off the bat is that I may write about personal finance and work-life balance and those types of issues right now, but it doesn't mean I was somehow born knowing that, or I got that right at the beginning in any way, shape, or form, because I definitely did not. And a lot of the things that I've learned about finance, I've taken more of an interest over the last 5, 6, or 7 years. I'm now probably about 7 years now. But the first 10 years of my career, I was really focused on getting medicine career going and building our department. And my wife and I had our children. That's really what took most of my time. And I did make a lot of financial mistakes along the way. So it's not that I came to the table knowing all this stuff. And really, for the beginning of I've always had an interest in finance, and in the sense that I knew it was important. And I got The Wealthy Barber as a teenager from my dad and read that, so I knew when I started making money, I had to put money in my RSP right away to start saving for retirement.
Right.
And
And I remember
I'd
you said that your parents also helped you set up like your TFSA RSP so that you had an early understanding in your home life about what those accounts were, right?
Yeah, so my parents set up an RSP for me when I was 18 and I allowed to do it. And then I started putting money into it right away with all my various jobs that I'd had. TFSAs didn't exist back then,
Right.
but that got me going. And it was just we just put it in mutual funds. That's all we knew about. And really there wasn't the internet and all of these resources that everybody has now. So that's what everybody did is you bought some mutual funds and put them in your RRSP, and that was kind of the end of it. So there was that piece for the investing piece, and then, I knew how to live on a budget because I didn't have any income, and our line of credit I got during medical school, but the interest rates were quite high. So, we learned to live on a budget and save money, and we were quite happy with that. So, but my initial approach to finance was, you work hard. We make a good income as physicians. You work hard and live within your means, and automatically save money away, and everything will turn out fine. And it wasn't really till about 2015 when we, over about a 2-year period, the marginal tax rates went from, the top rate went from 48% to 54%, and the government was starting to do fee clawbacks on physicians, which really amounts to another 4 or 5% tax increase. And I work in an academic center, so I have to pay a tax to the university, which is another 7% or whatever it is. So basically, 2/3 of my earned income after part of the year was going to pay for taxes and other things, and 1/3 of it was coming to us. So I kind of, and at the same time, we were getting a lot of flack about how physicians and other high income earners weren't pulling their weight and should be doing more, and that was the whole premise of why they were doing all these things. So, here my wife and I were with our family, working hard, giving up a lot to do this, and at the same time told we're not doing enough, we should be doing more. So I kind of stopped and asked, why am I doing this? Like, why should I be doing all of this when really it's not 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 being, it's not appreciated in that way. And that's when I was really starting to get burnt out, and I think all of that feeds into it, all those different factors. And that's when I started to pay attention to what I was doing, and trying to make more rational decisions about earning and spending, and learning more about how my taxes work and how my investing works, and paying attention to it that way. And then somewhere around 2017, some of the other things I was doing were winding down, and I'd learned all these things that I wish I had known. So I thought, well, maybe I'll start something new and start focusing on some of this material, because if people understand this, they might make better decisions and get themselves, off on the right foot, and not have to take, 10, 15 years to get there like I did.
Yeah, exactly. And it sounds like your blog has been a very valuable resource for people, especially since I remember reading something on your blogs about how like physicians don't necessarily learn about finances early, similar to your case, right? They don't really learn about it early because, the intensity of training takes up so much of your time that it leaves very little time for learning other stuff. And it can be hard because when you have a late start, you lose out on those decades of compounding returns. So that's why once you actually do end up having the time to learn about finances, you really have to absorb all the information like really quickly. So it can be very overwhelming for physicians to learn this stuff. So I wanted to focus a bit about this blogging thing that you've started shifting your career to. With being a blogger, is it something that you've been able to turn into a source of income for you?
I would say not really, and that's honestly not been the goal for me. For me, it's been about advancing my mission, which is to try to empower physicians to use all of their financial tools wisely, and expand their reach. I mean, there are ways you can turn a blog into money making, but I think there's a trade-off when you do that. So I mean, the startup costs to start a blog are pretty cheap. I mean, it's, you have to buy a domain name, and you get WordPress or whatever it is you can use to write with. So those costs aren't too expensive in
Can
terms
you
of
kind of
money.
comment a bit about what those costs are like for example, for someone who wants to do what you do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've stopped paying attention to it, is the honest answer. But I'd say it's somewhere it costs me a few $1,000s a year to
Oh
do it.
wow! So you're actually putting quite a lot of money into this blog.
Yeah, it costs me a bit of money, but again, it's the biggest cost is really in time.
Mm.
It takes a lot of time I mean, there's different ways you can do it. It takes me a lot of time to write content because I'm trying to write content that's different. And the things that I write about for high income professionals, it's one of those areas where it's a little bit more complicated, and most people that know about it are going to either write a little bit and then say consult our firm, or they're going to make it really confusing so that you want to consult their firm because it's really confusing, or they're just going to say nothing about it. So the things that I write about, I usually have to start from scratch and try to put it into a digestible way that we can understand and actually apply to our situation. So that usually is pretty labor intensive. It's pretty interesting. It's interesting. That's why I do it, and I think it's useful for us to know these things because I'm able to digest it from a physician or end user type of perspective rather than a sales perspective. But in terms of, you get into, well, do you monetize it or not? The way that websites get monetized is generally you have to have enough traffic that advertisers are going to pay to advertise on your site, and then you may get paid by the advertiser for the space like you would for a newspaper, or you may get paid for the click-throughs that go with it. And I consciously decided not to do that because my main goal is to have people read the content and learn from it. And I find if you get a lot of advertisements and things flashing here and there, it actually distracts from the purpose. So people are less likely to actually get through things if they're distracted by a bunch of advertisements. So I didn't really think that was where I wanted to go with it. And the other piece is that a lot of the advertising that's out there, for me to have something on my site that I'm going to advertise, that I have to actually believe in it and think it's actually adding some kind of value to what I'm trying to do. And a lot of it'll be like, how to get, there'll be loan companies or credit cards and all of those types of things trying to advertise, which I really don't see the value add of putting that kind of stuff on my website, honestly. I mean, sure, you can try to get points and which is the best credit card, that type of thing, but there's lots of blogs all over the place with credit card points and all those types of things. That's not what I wanted to focus on. I think with us as physicians, we have a lot of power because of our earning power, and we have a lot of resources at our disposal because we have earning power, we're driven, we're smart people, and for us to focus our energy, we get much more focusing on the big stuff, like how we earn and spend our money in big ways, and how we invest our money in big ways, as opposed to trying to credit hard hack and do
Yeah.
little types of nibbling at the edges. If we can get our big rocks in place, then I think we're good. So I didn't want to kind of get down those rabbit holes of nibbling around the edges of what I think are probably some of the smaller issues. I have one advertiser on my website, which is 𝗬trade, which is a discount brokerage. So I just recently this past year decided to sign on with a partnership with them to have them on my website because I actually do use their platform, and I think it's a good platform. So I have no problems whatsoever promoting that. And I think it's helped me. The reason why I did it largely was because it really kind of empowers me to use that to help people get involved with DIY investing and managing their own portfolios better. I get a small fee, I think, when people sign up using the link on my website, but it's pretty nominal. But the good thing is I've been able to build a DIY investor hub on my website, which is something I've been trying to do for about 5 years now, but I finally with this was able to do it where I can have, the educational material that you need to know about DIY investing and then also link that with the parts where people get stuck, because people get stuck on how to fill out forms or where to click and what to do. All these little things that we think are simple tasks are actually pretty intimidating when you're starting out with something new. So by doing this, I've been able to build it with screenshots and very explicit instructions, and also have contacts there to kind of clarify any of the little questions that people often get stuck on. So I've been able to build this to try to overcome a lot of those difficulties. So that's the one sort of financial partnership that I have on the website. I mean, I guess my goal with that is that if I can have that eventually cover the cost of the websites, I'll consider that a victory. But I think that's more of a psychological, moral victory than any sort of financial thing. I mean, the biggest investment with the blog is time, and I think that's probably the case with everyone who blogs. It's not really
Yeah. I don't
profitable
have a
per hour
physical, like a
activity.
website blog. I have like a YouTube blog, but similar to yourself, right? A lot of the times I might get approached by actually a lot of crypto companies, which I've just declined because the way I think about it is very similar to you as well, in that I make much more doing medicine than I would doing some sponsorship with companies that I may not necessarily agree with, or I may not necessarily even use some of these companies who want to partner with me. So I feel like the risk is just too high to your own brand if you partner with someone for just the marketing payout, yet they don't necessarily espouse the values that you have. So I
Yeah.
do remember one time we were discussing like after a talk, and you had mentioned that the blog actually loses you money. So I hope that, by people watching this video, they'll go and click on the Q-Trade thing so that at least you can get paid for a lot of the work and the research you've put in for your blog.
Yeah. Well, the other piece that I do that's with it is that when people do use that, I do try to mentor them as well. So if they get stuck on things, I might Zoom with them to help them get unstuck,
Oh,
and
that's
that and
so
that
helpful.
and
Yeah, it's
that
good
type
to
of thing.
know.
Part of why this arose is because I've been doing that with other colleagues for a number of years now. Uh, because even when you're starting, it's to have someone else to bounce things off of is very, very helpful. So and at least with this, I know when they're asking me about how do I find something, I can tell them really quickly usually because I know exactly where to look. So it facilitates that kind of troubleshooting.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like Q-Trade should pay you for that because you're just making their services much more easier for people to access.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a secondary thing. I mean,
Yeah,
it's more. uh, I was very excited this past week because I got a couple nice emails from some of the people that I've helped out, and it's great. I have people from the beginning of starting practice to and some people towards the end of their practicing
yeah.
years, and it's neat to see them kind of take over their investing and their financial lives, and they get so excited because they feel so empowered when they've done it for a while.
Definitely. I
It's
completely
very
agree as
cool.
well. Getting those emails it makes you feel really good.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So just out of curiosity, when you decided to shift into this 50-50 clinical work and 50% doing blogging and so on, how did you know when you were financially independent enough to support this hobby of blogging? In other words, like how did you know what your FIRE, like financial independence retire early number was?
Yeah, well, I think I've had a different approach to that in the sense that, I didn't get hung up on a specific number because the way that I think about planning for retirement and funding it, it's actually not just about the funding. It's what you're going to spend doing the time. Yeah,
Right.
I think is just as important as the financial piece. So for me, it was like, when can I start to scale back to part-time and still maintain our lifestyle and have our retirement savings where they're going to be and spend more time doing other things and try to make that more of a smooth transition than, all you work to get some fire number and then you flip a switch and you retire. I don't think that to me doesn't I think that's why the whole fire thing rings hollow with quite a few physicians because for most of us, when we're not in like a overworked burnout stage, we do enjoy our careers, find it rewarding. So our goal isn't to hammer down and get as much money as we can so that we can then pull the plug and pull the ejection seat and jettison ourselves. It's, how can we balance it along the way to make sure we're going to have that flexibility? And this is when I think about financial independence for physicians. I think it's one of these tools we should be aiming for somewhere in our we should try to aim for it somewhere in our mid 40s because that means that's around a point in our career where we've been doing it for a while and we may want to take our career in a different direction. And if you have financial independence, meaning that you're able to support yourself financially and do different things, well, then you can take your career where you want it to go. And that's a bit of more of a secondary consideration. And the other reason is once you start to get it past your mid 40s and into your 50s, that's when other things can happen. Like you could have a health issue or a family member has a health issue. And even though you were planning to work till age 65, if your financial plan was that, then you're going to be caught short. So whereas if you plan to have that kind of somewhere in your, late 40s or early 50s, then I think you're all of these having that security and that tool there is available for you to use it at a time where you're probably going to want to be able to use it. So that's the way I've been kind of tracking it. And people talk about the safe withdrawal rates and how can you have a survivable portfolio. And the more you read about it, the more you realize it's actually much more complicated. So people talk about 4%. Well, that's for a traditional retirement length, which if you're retiring earlier, it's going to be, you need more money. And it's also not including fees and taxes, which, depending how you're investing, if you have an advisor and you're using higher fee funds, well, you may withdraw 4% a year, but 2% goes to pay your fees and your advisor, and then you have another tax load on top of that. So I look at it as how much money do you have after tax and after fees, and use that as kind of the safe withdrawal rate. So for me, I knew kind of what our spending was, and I knew I've kind of how much money we had after tax in our portfolio. So I've got, I made a RoboCorp swap, which is like SWOT, which is this complicated Excel-based calculator, but it can kind of simulate your retirement drawdown and kind of attach how much of a tax load do you have sitting in your RSP and your corp. So and it gives you a percentage of what percentage you are towards having enough money for the safe withdrawal rate based on your age and retirement length and your portfolio mix, because all of those things factor in there. So I used that to kind of know that I was basically there. And that's on my website, but it's a bit more of a complicated calculator for people to use. But you can kind of put your portfolio information into there, and it gives a rough estimate.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like you kind of figured out, how much you were spending and then how much you needed to work to still maintain your lifestyle. It wasn't so much about like, oh, I'll reach this net worth and then I can retire, or I'll reach this age and then I'll retire. Those tend to be, it's more complex than that. And
Yeah, I think you need to have something to retire to. So you need to be
yeah,
building other interests and relationships outside of medicine, which I think, like investing, you need to do that over time. It's not something you can flip a switch. And in
exactly.
terms of the financial number, yeah, if you're able to scale it back and know you're still going to get there, then you can start to make some of that switch from, earning and investing and the financial piece to making sure you're paying attention to that non-financial piece.
Exactly. And just in terms of like for your wife, when you decided to kind of step back, I'm sure you had a conversation with her about it. Did she also decide to step back around the same time, or is she still deciding to work kind of full time as well?
Well, yeah, she's been working part-time with me for a number of years now. And now that I'm scaling back, what she's debating is, does she want to get back into some aspect of her previous career or not? That's her current debate. I mean, right now it's been good having both of us around and all hands on deck, because we've got two teenagers at home. And even though the sleep is better and a lot of those other issues are better, I think when teenagers need your attention, they need 100% of your focus, and you need to have a full emotional gas tank to be able to deal with that. So having both of us around uh, dealing with that right now, I think is what we're looking at. And yeah, at this point, because I'm starting to scale back, she's thinking about what she wants to do from a career standpoint from her time. So
Yeah.
we were
And
just talking
so,
about that this morning, actually.
oh no, that's great, because I always think like if you, let's say you decide to just like step back and now you have all this time and then your partner is still working full time, then it's like, oh, well, it's just by myself, kind of bored. So that's why I was wondering, like, if you two made the decision together and decide to coordinate the change in hours together as well.
Well, we've always had a pretty good mix in that, there's times like we spend time together every day, and we've always done that even when I was working a lot. So we have our dogs, and part of our time together each day is we walk our dogs together, and that's where we get outside. We can chat, and it's just the two of us. So we have that, and then now that we're both at home during the day, we usually reconvene around lunchtime, and
Oh,
then we
that's nice.
reconvene with the kids when they get home. So we have touch points, but other parts of the day we have our own interests and our own things that we're busy with, right? So we are able to spend time together, but we each have our own separate things that we do too. And I think what'll happen is as our kids become less of the uh, area where we need to be focusing our attention, then that frees up more space for us to look at other things. So we'll see. That's why I say I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 5 to 10 years. I
Yeah,
mean, that's why I kind of have that range, because that's when our kids will probably be off out of the house, hopefully.
for sure. So just kind of like turning the page to a different question. So I wanted to delve a little bit deeper into your portfolio. I know that one time we chatted in preparation for a talk we were giving together. You kind of told me a little bit about what your portfolio was like, especially since portfolios for doctors might look very different than someone who's not incorporated, for instance, right? So can you kind of talk about, maybe what percent of your portfolio is in TFSA RSP, Corp, taxable accounts, non-taxable accounts, and so on?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, I would say one piece of it is that my portfolio is probably more complex than it needs to be, and part of that's because, I started this years ago, and then it's kind of evolved over time as I've learned more and more. And over time, I've been progressively trying to make it more simple. Uh, but it's not perfect yet. I think if I were to start out from scratch, I would probably choose asset allocation ETFs to invest in those, and maybe use the Horizon one in my corporation, since it's got some good tax efficiency there, and probably not get too much more complicated than that. And I may end up there anyways, because what I'm considering with my portfolio now is that, I can manage it like this pretty easily. But what happens if I die? I have to make sure my wife wants to manage it the same way. So I don't want her to kind of have to give it to anybody else to take care of. So I've been progressively trying to simplify it, but it's not perfect yet. Uh, in terms of, where do we have our money? We've always tried to spread out our eggs, not have them all in one basket. So we don't, our corporation is about 40% of our portfolio. Our registered accounts, which is our TFSA and RSP, is about 15%. And then the other 45% is in personal taxable accounts, mostly in my wife's name. So over the years, we've done our best to kind of income split and siphon money out of the corporation efficiently, and build up that personal taxable account. And then our registered accounts are basically limited by the size. You can only put so much in your RSP or TFSA in any given year. But the corporation and our personal account is where most of our money is. And the thing about a corporation is a tax deferred account, just like an RRSP. So it's not that you may have a ton of money sitting in there, but it still has a tax liability attached to it. So that part of it is, can you use your tax shelters like your RSP and TFSA, which in the long run are a better tax shelter than a corporation. Except if you do get some very, very specific investing strategies, which are probably less diversified, then you could potentially get a corp to be a little bit better. But for most people, that's probably not the case. And then, when you have that money in the corporation, if there's ways that you can get bits of money out in a tax efficient way, like for us, capital dividends have been useful, because they can come out tax free, and then paying my wife her salary and some dividends, because she works for the corp enough that we can do that. We've been able to siphon out money tax efficiently and into her hands, which removes that tax liability. And she actually would pay a lower rate on investment income than a corporation would.
Yeah.
Corporations are better than the highest tax bracket, and they're about the same as the average tax bracket. But if you're in a lower tax bracket, they're actually a bit less efficient. So we probably have our money spread out more so than most people, and that's taken many, many years to do that. So if you're part of that's kind of a longer term strategy, to slowly siphon money out of your corporation tax efficiently. If you try to do it in large chunks, it's much less efficient. So we're
Exactly.
pretty spread out from an account standpoint, which is great, because when you go to draw money out later in retirement, if you have multiple pots to draw from, you have a lot more options to tax plan and keep your tax bill pretty close to zero. If you're able to take money from, like, a personal taxable account, it's going to have a very low tax load, because it's already had the biggest tax hits have already been taken on it. And then a corporation, you can take it out strategically, or donate to charity of appreciated stock, which is another way to donate to charity and get money out tax efficiently. I wrote about that recently. So there's lots of different options you have if you have different pots. And in terms of asset allocation, I'm about 20% Canadian, 20% US small cap value, I have about 20% NASDAQ 100, which is a bit of a unusual mix. Uh, the you the small cap value tilt helps to counteract the NASDAQ a little bit, and I've got the small cap value that my wife has some of that, and some of it's in our RRSPs. And the Canadian piece is exclusively in our corporation, and
because of the
that's
favorable dividends in a corp,
yeah,
right?
that's right. It has the favorable dividend treatment. So the Canadian side of my corporation has my Canadian stuff in it, and that is the area where I do have individual stocks because I've got a large enough Canadian portfolio that I could, in a relatively efficient way, basically emulate the TSX 60.
Yeah,
Now I'm debating whether that's worth the hassle or not. I part of why I did it is because I have multiple options to donate appreciated stocks to charity if I have multiple
right.
different stocks to choose from, but I'm not sure that it's worth all the hassle of doing that. Moving forward, I'm probably not. Oh, I'm definitely not going to be doing any of that moving forward. That's kind of a bit of a legacy. And moving forward, I've started using 𝗧cie𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 instead, which is a all-in-one ETF. And then the reason why I have the NASDAQ 100 is that's kind of the US side of my corporation. And the NASDAQ 100 is US large cap growth, but it excludes big financials. And the Canadian market is very, very heavy in financials and oil and all that kind of stuff.
And
Whereas the
this
NASDAQ,
NASDAQ is all in your corp as well,
yeah,
right?
and
Okay.
it pays very low dividends, and it kind of counteracts my Canadian overweighting with financials, etc. So this is what I mean when I say it's more complicated than it probably needs to be. And I think, moving forward, I'm just using 𝗧cie𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 in my corporation, which is basically does the same thing, but with one fund, and it's simple.
Yeah, and
And
it
then
and
the
it could
rest,
be beneficial, especially once you hit that passive income limit in your corporation as well.
yeah, I don't think it's ever going to be an issue for me because
Mhm.
the only income I have in my corporation really is from the Canadian dividend paying stuff.
Yeah,
And then the NASDAQ 100 stuff, the dividends on are pretty small. So it's
yeah.
really probably not going to be an issue. And then the age is not going to hopefully have any distributions.
And the
And
last time we talked, I know that we were talking about emerging markets, developing markets. Do you still allocate a certain percentage to emerging markets, or you've completely exited that?
yeah, so people will be like, well, you've given us 60% of your portfolio. I've got to, the other 20% is just like, I tote the total US market. And then I've got 15% in non-North American developed and then 5% in emerging markets. So overall, it's 100% equity, which is a very, very aggressive portfolio. Um, but yeah, it's globally diversified
Yeah.
and kind of spread out.
And what was the rationale for not having bonds in your portfolio?
So I did, yeah. So this,
Because I remember you did say you had like 10% bonds in the past.
yeah, I had 20%. I've gone higher than that at points. It's one of those things where I was trying to find my right asset allocation for my risk profile, and I I've got a pretty high risk tolerance, but at the same time, everybody thinks they have a high risk tolerance until they get their first bear market. So I did have bonds in there to kind of ballast myself out. Uh, but then after being through a couple of bear markets, and I actually sold them in March of 2020 when the
Mm,
bonds prices shot up through the roof and
yeah.
the market was bottoming, because my big inclination at that time was not to panic, as like I need more cash to buy what's going on here. So I sold my bonds at that point and went back to equity. And the other thing with that happened at that point, I was considering, okay, well, if I'm going to be retiring in a few years, how do I want to mitigate sequence of return risk? And sequence of return risk is basically that if you get really unlucky and you retire at the peak of a market and then go into a bear market, or you have a bear market sometime around that time when your portfolio is its biggest. Because if you have a 30% drawdown on your peak portfolio, that's way worse than having a 30% drawdown when your portfolio is just a small amount of money. So it can really change whether you run out of money or not. And one of the ways to mitigate that is to try to make your portfolio less volatile. So you put in more bonds or safe assets so that you aren't forced to take out money to live on uh, at a bad time, essentially. So the traditional approach to that is to increase the amount of fixed income you have when you're approaching that period of retirement. So if you can retire in the next 5 years or so, you'd be upping your fixed income allocation. And then when you're after you've been retired for 5 or 6 years, you can probably go back to whatever your your risk tolerance based asset allocation is. Because if you have fixed income for a long time, then you may not get the returns to have your portfolio live as long as you do. So that's kind of one approach to it. So I looked at that. A variation of that is to say I'm going to take 5 years of my living expenses and have them as 5 years of GICs that mature in a ladder. And if things are going well, then I'm just going to reinvest it. And if they aren't going well, I'm going to use that instead of selling from my portfolio. So that's another, I think, psychologically really soothing, straightforward way to do it. What I ended up settling on, though, is we had enough to retire. And another way to mitigate your sequence of returns risk is to have variable spending or variable income. So if the markets aren't doing well, you can work a bit more, make a bit more money, or you can spend a little bit less if you have fat to trim in your budget. And that really applies to us in that I decided, I'm going to continue working and I work enough to cover our living expenses. So even though we had enough that we could retire, I'm going to mitigate that danger period around retirement just by continuing to work and make enough money for us to live on.
Right.
So I didn't really need to change my asset allocation based on that. It just really needed to be based on risk tolerance. And we have more than enough money at this point that we can tolerate that. It's a lot less scary for me knowing that we're not going to run out of money. So I can just kind of ride it out.
And in preparation for you to kind of cut back on your work, did you do the rebalancing yourself and you developed your own portfolio yourself? Or what kind of preparation did you do? Like, did you meet with a financial advisor ahead of time? Did you try to make sure your whole house was paid off before cutting back or scaling back? Did you try to increase your dividend paying stocks? What was kind of your preparation strategy leading up to this point?
Okay, yeah, you got a lot in there. So I'll start off with the advisor piece. So yeah, we met with our financial advisor, and we do have one still. I don't pay any fees for it. I've kind of grandfathered through from previous years with one of the companies. And at this point, the advisor and I just really have a conversation about things because I basically manage everything myself. But he did run our numbers to make sure that this actually happened before I decided I was going to look at cutting back. And he basically said, look, either you work less or you spend more, or you're just going to have so much money that it's not going to matter. So you need to just you can continue doing what you're doing, but it doesn't make any sense. So you need to think what it is that's important to you and use that financial power that you've got to kind of affect changes. So that kind of happened a few years in advance, and we ended up just getting progressively further ahead after that. So I knew we were, from that standpoint, in a pretty good financial position. In terms of the house, we did downsize houses, and that was part of what precipitated all of it. Is that we thought to ourselves, okay, well, where would we really like to retire to, and what would we really like to be doing? And then the question is, well, why aren't we doing that now then? So we went around and checked out different places that we thought we might want to live, because I'm not a big city person, and neither is my wife. So we want to look at different places where we'd have amenities, but I'd be able to go camping and hiking and do all the things that we like to do right in our backyard, as opposed to being surrounded by an urban environment. So we went to different places, found a place that we'd want to go to, and it was a good time to switch with our kids just between high school and that type of thing, because they were going to be switching schools anyway.
Yeah, I remember you said you had like a 10,000 square foot house. And so
Yes.
that must be I can't even comprehend that because I live in downtown Toronto where nothing is that big. So that
Yeah.
must be a big downsize that you had there.
Yeah, we had a giant country home, which for at the time of our lives, for that time of our lives, it was great because the kids could be running around outside and play. We had lots of space, and I had a big barn and a workshop, which is the one piece that I do miss. I'm going to be building a workshop onto the back of my house here to replace that. But yeah, it was a big change. So we did decide to put that up for sale. It went up for sale in February of 2020.
Mhm.
right at the beginning of the pandemic, and we sold it in the fall of that year. But we had bought a house in the area where we moved to downsize to.
Great. So then you don't have any mortgage debts at all.
Yeah, so we were mortgage free when that happened. That we decided to take on a mortgage and then invest it in my wife's name, since interest rates were like 1.8% or something ridiculous. So we do have a mortgage now. My wife took that money and invested all of that, and then she pays our mortgage. And because she pays our mortgage and it's invested and she's paying the interest, then that gets deducted from her income. So we don't have a lot of money locked up in home equity. It's not earning us money. All of our money is actually earning us money at this point. So
Yeah.
now, if the interest rates are 5 or 6% when it's time to renew our mortgage, we'll probably just pay that off, and because that's a pretty good risk-free return to just eliminate that. But we
Yeah.
didn't do it.
So
We didn't do it this time just because the rates were so low,
exactly. So no,
and we
you
had a
don't
plan.
invest in any REITs, and you're also not a real estate investor, right?
Yeah, so we don't invest in real estate outside of our home. I mean, and that's not because I think it's a bad way to invest. I think it's a good way to invest. I think if you're going to try to invest using leverage, then that's probably a great way to do it. I mean, for us, we don't need to use leverage really to meet our objectives. We are, in the sense that we're using the mortgage from our personal home, but that allows us to income split and use it with leverage. And it was just a really good opportunity with the way the rates were. So that makes sense for us. But if someone else was doing it, then that'd be a way to use leverage.
Right.
It's not my area of expertise, and I just don't. I think to do it well, I think either you pay somebody to do it, or you're going to put in the time and invest the energy to do it yourself. And we're not. Neither of us are really looking for more work
Right.
to make money, and we don't really need to. So that's why we haven't really gone down that route.
Got it. And in what role did a whole life insurance play as part of your retirement strategy? Because I know that from previous conversations, you have whole life. And so was that part of your retirement strategy?
Yeah, our whole life, I largely ignore, honestly. I mean, so we got sold a whole life insurance policy back before I really paid a lot of attention learning about all of these things. And I got a small, it's pretty small, and I got it with the intention, okay, well, it's a way to hold fixed income in my corporation. It's not going to generate income. And the interest at that point, I thought interest rates could never go lower, and that was like back in 2015 or something, when interest rates went lower after that. It goes to show you market timing, and what you think is going to happen doesn't often happen. But that's how I ended up with it. But it's a very, very, very small piece of our portfolio, maybe like 1 or 2% or something. And I'm not going to grow it any larger. I think, knowing what I know now, the thing about whole life insurance is that the life insurance piece of it, it's priced in a way that it's going to be a lot more than if you were to buy term 100, which would be like basically providing you the same kind of coverage unless you live over 100 years. But but they make the insurance piece more expensive, and then on the investment piece, the way that they do their dividends, which they call dividends, but they're sort of participating payments. There's all sorts of adjustments and fees and things that happen in there in the background, that really what you're betting on is whether the actuarials, when they design the policy, is that what pans out or not. So it's a relatively safe investment in the sense that you're going to have a safe return on it. When you die, you will get the money. So but at the same time, it's just like everything else, risk and return related. So you're going to have a safe but very low long-term return on it. So it's kind of like, to me, it'd be like kind of having a fixed income return. To me, it's less flexible than just having a bonds ETF, but it's also different in that it doesn't really move with interest rates so much as the bonds necessarily do. And there's a lot of stuff that's opaque in the background. So
Mm. Yeah.
long story short, I think it could have that type of return. In terms of why would you want to do that? I mean, when you have easier, cheaper, more flexible options, well, you might want to do that if you have a property or a business that you want to keep in the family that you don't want to have to be sold when you die. And for example, if you have a business or a property and you die, and then it becomes a taxable event and there's a bunch of tax owing on that, well, you don't want your heirs to have to sell it in order to pay the tax on it, because that kind of defeats the purpose. So you might have a whole life insurance policy to cover the tax on that liability. But if it's something that you don't care whether it's sold or kept in the family, well, then it's probably not necessarily uh, needed.
Gotcha. So when you decide to get whole life insurance, it wasn't necessarily for the purpose of, passing down a little bit of inheritance to your children tax-free. It just happened to be something that you purchased at a younger age that you kind of just grandfathered into your portfolio.
Yeah, and that's how it's sold. It's sold as a way, okay, you could tax it. You can use the capital dividend account to tax-free send money on to your heirs. But the question is, if you didn't put the money in there, what would you be investing it in? You'd be investing it in something else that suits your risk tolerance. And if that were equity, well, you have capital gains, you're going to have capital dividend account there. And if you have a higher return over all those years, then you're going to have, yeah, you're going to pay more tax, but you're still going to be passing on more money.
Yeah. And for yourself, in kind of preparation for semi-retirement, did it change your salary versus dividend payment to yourself at all, or you're still just paying yourself a salary from your corporation?
Yeah, it didn't change it for us because we're still using the RSP room and contributing to the RSP room. So we're still giving ourselves salaries for that. And we have a small amount of income in our corporation, so we'll really need to pay a small amount of dividends to keep the refundable taxes flowing.
Yeah,
So we pay enough to keep the refundable taxes flowing in dividends and to live on, and enough and salary. So we really haven't changed it all that much. Other than that, we're paying out a lot less than we used to, just because our cost of living has dropped pretty dramatically by downsizing our house.
that's great. And then just one final question. IPPs, so individual pension plans, was that something you are considering for yourself as a source of additional income in retirement? If not, why not?
Yeah, so we haven't. So the use of an IPP would be if you if you want to save more money in an RSP like way,
Yeah.
than your RSP room provides, then you can do that using an IPP, and it's a way of essentially shifting more money from your corporation into a registered plan, essentially. We haven't done it because we just haven't felt the need to do it. So we've got enough money in our RSPs, and we don't have a problem with the amount of money that we have in our corporation, because over the long period of time, we've been keeping our corporation relatively manageable. I think if we had been in a situation where we had left everything in the corporation and we'd paid ourselves salaries, and used our RSPs, that we really needed to kind of get more assets out of the corporation into an RSP type of account, that we might have considered doing it. The big advantage of it is if you in the IPP is if you have um, a low returning asset in the IPP, then you can top it up with money from the corporation. If you have a high performing asset in the IPP, well, you don't get to do that, and we're 100% equity. So if I had a bunch of low expected return assets that I wanted to hold somewhere, then yeah, IPP might be useful if I had a big bond allocation or something. But we don't have that, so we wouldn't really be taking advantage of any of that. And the other thing is, for you to get one set up and manage it, well, there's the actuarial fees, which you have to do. There's an extra filing you have to do with it. So it's a bit more hassle. And then the people that set it all up also usually want to sell you funds to put in it. So we'd be exchanging, our low cost, efficient method that we've got now for some more fee laden funds, just so we could be using an IPP. So I think the costs actually might end up outweighing any of the potential benefits. And for us, there really wasn't a lot of benefits. And we just didn't think it was worth that, either financially or from a time perspective.
Right. So just in closing, I just have some quick, like rapid fire questions that I just wanted to ask you. So number
Mhm.
one, what was your best performing investment? Could
My
be
wife,
anything.
my
Sorry,
marriage,
your
my my
marriage.
my,
Oh,
my
that's
marriage
a good
easily.
answer.
I
Yeah.
think
And
that
what was your worst performing investment?
uh, probably BlackBerry stock. So when I was starting to invest, I thought, okay, I'm gonna learn about valuing investments, and I read lots of books, and I had an advisor he would give me suggestions and bounce things off. And if you want to know when I bought BlackBerry, just look back at when it was at its peak price. That was
Oh,
probably the exact day when I
wow.
bought it.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
the good news
Yes.
is I did that when I didn't have a lot of money, and in the sense it felt really bad and taught me a lesson, and I didn't lose a lot in the way of dollars as if I had done something like that now.
Right. That's true. Yeah. Sometimes if you don't, I guess if you don't know, you never know what's going to happen with some stocks, right? They'll just suddenly drop and you will be left holding the bag, I guess.
Yeah, well,
Um,
you can't predict that, and if you were just to randomly select more stocks, the most of the market returns are driven by a very, very small proportion of the stocks, something like 5% or something. So if you can pick that 5% before they go up in price, then you're a genius. But the chances are you're going to pick the 95%.
that's true.
And the most common outcome is actually to zero, honestly. There's some
Yes.
data on that. It's
Yes,
interesting.
for sure, for sure. And what is a charitable cause you're passionate about?
Yeah, so I guess I would say in terms of giving money wise, cystic fibrosis is something we've given a lot to because it's we've known people with it, we've had friends with it as well, and it's something that our family together has been involved with fundraising. So I think when you look at giving, it's combining relationships and impact and all those things together. So we've found that to be a good cause. In terms of money, my biggest charitable cause is probably running my blog and the financial education piece. And I say that in the sense that it's not to me, it's not about teaching people who make lots of money how to have more money. It's teaching people who have a lot of potential in that they've got a good income and they've got a lot of strong attributes that if they learn how to use that together, they can actually expand their reach and do amazing things. So if I can help more people do that, then that expands my reach as well. So that's kind of the mission I'm most passionate about in terms of donating my time.
No, that's great, and I completely agree with your thoughts on that as well. What is your favorite vacation spot?
Yeah, so I it's interesting. One of the things that my wife and I enjoy about vacationing is we don't like to do the same thing all the time. So in terms of which place we go to, so we don't really have a specific one place that's our favorite vacation spot, but we our favorite vacationing has been in our motorhome, traveling around with our kids and our dogs and seeing different places. And we have a lot of different places which we've enjoyed seeing together. And that's North Carolina is quite beautiful up in the mountains.
Wow,
And then there's Hilton Head Island's kind of a nice beach area. Northern Michigan's quite pretty and a bit quieter. Uh, the east coast of Canada was a nice trip. So those would be the types of vacations that we enjoy the most.
great. And final question, what is your best piece of marriage advice?
Um, well, yeah, I think the biggest thing I would say is before you get married, it's really to be that you're ready and your partner's ready to be all in to it before you get married, like 100% committed to it, and not partially where you're gonna get married, but you're each gonna kind of have separate ways of doing everything because you have to be aligned in terms of your financial management, your kid, whether you're going to have kids or not, how you're going to parent them, what you want to do, what are some of the things you want to do in the longer term. They have to be compatible and they don't have to be identical, but they have to be compatible, which means you have to openly discuss it. So I think, listening to what the other person has to say, thinking about it, being honest about what your thoughts are, not just trying to be agreeable with everything, and then being able to consider those both points of view and being willing to change your own or them willing to change their own so you can find compatible uh, ways of doing things, I think is probably the biggest piece to for getting into your marriage and making it successful. And I would say that really the other piece of that is it's not like you get married and it's done. I mean, it's a long time, hopefully,
Yes.
and you're both going to change over that time period as well. So you have to have this kind of ongoing dialogue and pay attention to all of these issues over time, and kind of you're both going to grow in different ways, but you want to try to make sure that you're growing compatibly.
Great. So thank you so much for this interview, Mark. And if anyone wants to learn more about Mark and what he does, please check out the looniedoctor.ca, as he has some excellent articles on there, especially for physicians. So thank you so much for your time and for giving us a lot of valuable advice.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.